Good morning, everyone. Good evening and good afternoon as well. It looks like the Blizzard's Mythic Plus dev team has come back from their Diablo 4 hiatus because we have just gotten a quite large list of big, thick, solid nerfs to Mythic Plus. Mostly nerfs to bosses, but also a few bunch of nerfs going to thrash mobs. Now, one of the more complained parts of Mythic Plus has been the state of healers recently. The amount of damage, the amount of burst damage that is unavoidable and you simply have to deal with it as a healer in Mythic Plus. It has left healers a little bit stressed out in trying to complete the Mythic Plus keys, and it looks like Blizzard is taking this problem to heart because the list of nerfs is quite large. It's definitely, let's just put it this way, it's the largest set of nerfs in Mythic Plus we have gotten this expansion, coming all at once. So the first nerfs in question are to Brackenhide Hollow. First one is to Gash Tooth. You have a Gash Frenzy, periodic damage reduced by 25%. Here is our Gash Tooth boss. This is probably the more annoying part of this encounter and the more dangerous part of this encounter when he does Gash Frenzy and players have to find a way to heal themselves. DPS players don't even know they can actually heal themselves if they are a paladin or a priest or a druid. That actually helps a lot. But now the ability itself has also been nerfed to make it easier to heal up this damage. Considering this was the hardest part of the entire encounter, it's gonna make the first boss of Brackenhide Hollow much more manageable now. But then we have continued nerfs to the last boss of Brackenhide Hollow. The other two bosses in the middle are reasonably not really considered that challenging. So instead, the Catriarch Rathai gets a 10% nerf to Withered Eruption, which is the big AoE that happens every 3 cycles of the totem, and then the totem itself has an even longer cast time now. This cast time, I believe, started out being 3 seconds, and then it was nerfed to 5 seconds, and now it's a grand total of 7 seconds of time for you to get rid of this totem. Definitely also much more manageable when it comes to Brackenhide Hollow. Now we have our dungeon difficulty over here. Brackenhide Hollow was, you know, on the middle of the pack, more or less. It wasn't one of the easiest dungeons, but at the same time also not one of the hardest dungeons. If we had to mention the hardest part of Brackenhide Hollow, though, it would likely have to be trash mobs, not really the bosses, but at the very least, these bosses had some problems. In particular, I would say the better one of the nerfs to Brackenhide Hollow is the one to Gash Frenzy on the first boss of the dungeon. After this, we have Halls of Infusion. Halls of Infusion, unfortunately, only has one boss. Players were expecting some other juicy things coming from Halls of Infusion. Instead, we have Power Overload from the first boss, from Watcher Iridius, to only target 2 players now instead of 3, and to have the dot damage that you receive once you get targeted by Power Overload reduced by 33%. Now this is perhaps a little bit more of a complaint when it comes to this dungeon, because when you go to Halls of Infusion, players tend to take it personal. For example, when it comes to these fucking balls over here and their containment beam, their spammable, unstoppable, continuously channel single target damage ability on the party, which does a lot of damage, especially when you do the pulls with 2 of them, like here, and the pulls with, of course, 3 of them over here. So this one is not being touched. You also have other possible annoyances, like for example, when you go down and you start doing the Drake part, of course, the AoE damage of the Drake is also very, very big. Luckily, Shadow Priest is meta, so this one can kind of get ignored because of Masty Spell. So you can get rid of a lot of this damage via Masty Spell, so perhaps that's why players are not nearly as annoyed at this mob. But yeah, in terms of bosses, this boss was one of those deceptively dangerous, especially on Tyrannical, because of the damage of his Power Overload and the size of the Power Overload, which would cause some problems of coordination amongst your party. So it's still a decent nerf. It's just that players would have expected something extra, perhaps when it came to Halls of Infusion. Talking about Halls of Infusion, it is one of the harder dungeons overall. It has one of the lowest success rates out of all the dungeons for the entire season, from the start of May to now. After Halls of Infusion, the next set of nerfs is the biggest one, of course. Look at this shit, to Neltharus. So, first we have the trash mobs. We have the Iron Torch Commander health reduced by 15%, the Lava Bearer by 11% health reduction, and then the Warden by 11%. Now, to refresh your memory about Neltharus and these trash mobs, the Iron Torch Commander, in case you're confused, it's because you never actually killed it. It's the one right here, the one that you usually skip and ignore. Probably will still continue to be ignored. Then you have the Lava Bearer, which is the just you know, the useless guy that keeps throwing around lava, mostly also harmless. And then the Warden is back at the start of the dungeon. You have a whole bunch of Wardens all over the place. They are the ones that do the Volcanic Guard frontal that you have to dodge. Those are the trash mobs that are being nerfed for Neltharus. Again, here's another place where players might have went and talked about the Thaumaturge, for example. His Magma Conflagration, his Molten Core, for example, are likely a source of annoyance when it comes to Mythic Plus, when it comes to trash mobs. We also have other sources of annoyances, for example, the Lavamancer with his barrier and spawning of ads. This one is not getting touched by Blizzard, so trash nerfs are okay in here, but not really that groundbreaking. Where we do get more serious nerfs are to the bosses. So Magma Tusk has a further 10% health nerf. It also has 25% damage to Magma Eruption, 14% damage reduction to Lava Wave, 21% damage reduction to Lava Spray, and fewer amounts of lava puddles being spawned around the room. Now, out of all of this, likely the two most important ones are the first two, because those are the ones that matter the most. Now you need less damage to kill the boss, and now the main ability, the main damage source on this boss is nerfed by a lot. This is definitely the most important one. You know, Lava Wave, you're kind of supposed to dodge it anyways. Lava Spray, it happens every once in a while to a single player and it doesn't do too much damage as long as you have a defensive ready. The real bigger problem was the Magma Eruption. So now, with this one being significantly nerfed by 25%, it will make progressing through this boss, through the keys, where you start realizing it's a bit too heavy of a damage, like 22, 23, 24, more manageable for the wider part of the player base. Further bosses, further nerfs, we have Forge Master Gorek, health also reduced by 10%, and then Blazing Hammer damage reduced by 20%. So again, the AoE damage, the main AoE damage of the encounter, just like Magma Eruption, has also been nerfed by 20%. Lastly, Warlord Sarga, health reduced by 10%, like the other two bosses, and then Molten Gold, periodic damage reduced by 20%. This was quite the deceptive and dangerous type of damage when the party takes up the treasures, gets the cursed debuff dotting on them, and then they have Molten Gold dotting on them. It starts to become quite heavy, constant damage to have to babysit a single player with this type of damage intake, especially if the player in question is kind of squishy. It's kind of, you know, not very tanky. It was kind of annoying as a healer to have to constantly babysit that player. Now it's going to be made a little bit more manageable in Neltharus. Now, talking about the difficulty of Neltharus, here we have the actual hardest dungeon. Here is Neltharus throughout the season. It's the lowest dungeon for chance of success since the release of this Season 2. Even this week on Fortified, it's still the lowest one of the dungeons, below a 50% success chance as a dungeon. So definitely welcome set of nerfs to Neltharus. After Neltharus, we still stay at the end because we have Neltharion's Lair. The trash mob is kind of ignored. We do have one small change to the Wild Shard Crawler's Acid Splatter damage, no longer scaling with Mythic Plus level, which is whatever. It was mostly annoying at the start when you were just trying to hop on top of this pool on the ground and somehow it was doing 40% of your HP. Now it doesn't anymore. Now it's just a random puddle of poison on the ground without doing too much damage. The actual nerfs are to bosses. Rockmora has Crystalline Ground damage reduced by 25%, and Naraxas has even further beyond Toxic Wretch nerfed by 25%. So even more nerfs. Once more, I'm sure you have started to read a pattern by now. Nerfs to the AoE heavy damage abilities to the encounter, the hardest part to heal for the healer of the encounter. The same goes for Neltharion's Lair. Now, you know, when it comes to trash mobs, some players might have complained here and there. I'm sure you already know where we are going with this. In Neltharion's Lair, you might have, for example, right after you deal with the first boss, you start questioning some of these mobs, like for example the Breaker and his Avalanche. It's not that the Avalanche is OP or super dangerous by itself, it's a little bit hard to see. We might have liked to see a little bit more of a different color, of a different perhaps particle effects to more clearly show Avalanche coming down. And remember, this one didn't even used to have a circle before. Before this season, Avalanche was just dropping down rocks on the ground, and if you were in the way, you were almost dying. But even now, with the circles showing Avalanche, it's a little bit too hard to see. And then of course the other problem players kind of wanted to see nerfed, right? The Pelters, right? Super annoying for both reasons, both the throwing around of rocks to random people and the jumping around, preventing you from keeping them together, cleaving them down, AoEing them down. So no, it gets away for now. It doesn't get any nerfs in this round of tuning for the dungeons. We then have changes to Uldaman. Sentinel, Talondra's, Herd and Shards periodic damage has been reduced by 20%. Of course, once more, the more challenging part of the encounter when it came to oppressive damage for the healer to heal is the dot left behind by the shards. It's been nerfed now. Emberon, this is a more quality of life change. The Seeking Flame visual has been updated and it's much easier to see. Now, you know, sure, now you can see them a little bit better over here. But were they really the hardest part of the encounter? Were they really that big of a problem to deal with these? Not really. I don't think so, at least. I never thought these Seeking Flames were the hardest part of this encounter. I'm not too surprised that Talondra's is the only boss that gets nerfed in Uldaman, because Uldaman in Tyrannical is okay. It's definitely harder in Fortified. Yeah, this week in Fortified, Uldaman is the second hardest dungeon. Meanwhile, overall, Uldaman is on a more acceptable level. So if anything, you might have been expecting more nerfs to the trash mobs of Uldaman rather than the bosses of Uldaman. But for now, bosses is all we get. Then we have Underrot. Now you might be wondering, Underrot doesn't need nerfs. Come on. True. The only nerf coming to Underrot is to Dark Echoes, the cast of the Grotesque Auror for the very high, heavy AoE damage. Now you have more time. Now you have more time to react. You have 1.5 seconds instead of 1. That's the only adjustment coming for Underrot. And of course, okay, I am mentioning it just because, but of course Underrot is the easiest of the dungeons to complete. The last one in line is Vortex Pinnacle. You would have guessed it already. Assad gets nerfed, Skyfall Nova gets nerfed, the AoE damage of the add in Vortex Pinnacle gets nerfed by 20%. Again, Vortex Pinnacle was amongst the tougher type of dungeons overall in both Fortified, because of some very chunky Fortified mobs, and then of course also Tyrannical. It does have some nasty Tyrannical bosses. So either way, it was difficult. This boss was the more problematic one when it came to this add spawning, so it's good that it gets nerfed. Now, once more, Vortex Pinnacle is another one of these victims where you might have expected some other things to be nerfed, like for example, the super annoying Rushing Wind, the dot that goes on players, especially the problem that can target the same player twice. So when the player uses his first defensive, maybe then it's naked, it doesn't have anything else for the second one. It's you know, it's a little bit annoying to have these type of mechanics that can double target the same player, making it much harder for them to survive. Vortex Pinnacle, as mentioned, has one of these. We mentioned Halls of Infusion with the containment beam spam is also kind of annoying. So none of that has gotten changed. As mentioned, most of these changes were focused around bosses and reducing the damage of bosses. Not about annoying mechanics or simplifying the mechanics or removing part of the mechanics to make the encounter more smooth. This was definitely a healer-centric set of nerfs. It was definitely a set of nerfs to make healing more manageable, less stressful, and less intensive in certain parts of these dungeons. So it's good to see that we come back to have some Mythic Plus changes, even though we had to wait from quite a few weeks before we got this round of tuning, but at the very least now it has come. So with this, we're going to leave each other on this weekend. Thanks to everyone who has enjoyed the video and also everyone else who now, spurred by these changes, will go back playing some Mythic Plus, especially healers. We guys are few right now in keys. So please go ahead and join these nerfed dungeons. For today, though, we can leave each other right here. Thanks, of course, to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help. You can also then support completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I finished part 1 of my hair cutting. I still have part 2 though. I still have my backside to be cut.